Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is the monthly wrap-up for November of 2021. So, I got a decent amount read for November. I mostly stuck to nonfiction November, except for two books that I read for Book Trek 2021. So, except for one book in the nonfiction category, I stuck to books that have been on my shelf for over 10 years that I thought it's about time I get to them. It's been long enough. The first book is not that. The first book is just one that I had been wanting to get to for a long time and finally did. And because it is Native American Heritage Month as well, I chose to read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, An Indian History of the American West by D. Brown. Published in 1970. I really enjoyed this. It clarified, some figures in the West and Native Americans that I knew by name. I knew very little about them, but I certainly learned a lot more. It also introduced me to some characters in history that I found utterly fascinating and that I want to learn more about. I don't know if I could find the picture offhand of the one in particular. Yeah, this one. Eli Parker. He was just fascinating to me. I want to find out more about him. Maybe want to read more about President Grant as well and his relationship with Native Americans. This is certainly much more of a military history. You're not going to find a lot of social or cultural history in this. There's a very almost novelistic approach to it. It reads more like a novel than like nonfiction at times, is what I mean. You're not going to read this thinking, though, that it's anything other than a white man writing as though they were, from the Native American perspective. But I still really appreciated it. It definitely made me want to read more about Native Americans. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. The next three books are, as I said before, books that have been sitting on my shelf for at least a decade that I needed to get to. The first one was Last Words by George Carlin, his autobiography, published shortly after he died, but he had been basically writing it for well over a decade with Tony Hendra. And this goes into, of course, his life, but also his growth as a comedian, as an artist, his political awareness, his falling away from religion. And I read this in conjunction with the abridged audiobook. I generally stay away from abridged audiobooks, but that one happened to be read by Carlin's brother, who sounds very much like Carlin, and who was also a very important person in his life. And I'm really glad I read it, or was able to listen to it that way. And I would listen to a chapter, and then I would go through it physically, seeing the things that I missed. And I certainly did really enjoy this one. And then I read John Krakauer, Where Men Win Glory, the Odyssey of Pat Tillman. Pat Tillman was a football player who had given up multi-million-dollar contract for the NFL in order to join the Army after the attacks on 9/11. Felt basically his patriotic duty. And he ended up being killed in friendly fire, although the government basically tried to hide that fact and cover it up at first. And Krakauer talks about Tillman, he talks about Afghanistan, he talks about the cover-ups, and essentially how the real Pat Tillman was somebody that neither the right nor the left were really getting right in their depictions of him. The best part, I think, about this were Tillman's own diary entries. He does actually come off as a very thoughtful, very, a dedicated person who thought very, very deeply about things in life, and who didn't fit the stereotype, certainly, of, a thoughtless football player or anything like that. And I didn't mention before, but one of the things that drew me to buy both of these books back in the, before 2010, the late aughts, I'm not sure exactly what we call that era, Carlin and Tillman were both atheist, which at that time, somebody who lost his faith in high school in the 90s, And I noticed when I would find out that people were atheists and maybe wanted to learn more, and especially when it came to Pat Tillman, that fact ended up kind of breaking my own stereotypes that I might have had about football players and soldiers and football players who became soldiers. So I'm glad that I read this, although I did have some issues with it, and there were some omissions that I was very surprised about. I said in my Fresh Red Kills episode, which, by the way, I talk about all these books in separate videos, Fresh Red Kills or Book Trek later on. If you want to know more about them, you can look at those videos. But essentially, it felt like Krakauer needed to pick a thesis and stick to it, and he doesn't quite do that here. He jumps around a little bit too much. But anyway, I'm glad that I read it. The other nonfiction book that I read for November was Brian Greene, The Elegant Universe. I wanted to know more about string theory, with the knowledge that string theory has not presented many of the promises in science that when this was published, people thought that it was going to, or they hoped it was going to. And that's fine. I mean, this was written during what Greene calls the second string theory renaissance, and maybe there will be a third. But I just wanted to know more about string theory, and I had this book, and I believe it won a Pulitzer. I had promised myself going into it that I wouldn't get lost in details and bogged down, that I would just kind of go for the ride, and that's basically what I did. Did I understand everything in this book? No, I didn't. I followed the overall plot. I certainly didn't get all the details, but the illustrations helped, and I think that that Brian Greene does have a very clear sense of writing about concepts, even if so many of the concepts are mathematical and are well above my head. But I'm glad that I read it, and I do understand string theory more. That's not to say that I understand string theory. I just understand it more than I did. And then for Book Trek, 2 Voyager novels. For Book Trek, myself and some of the booktubers are reading Star Trek fiction for the last 5 months of the year, from August to December. And in November, we are dedicated to Voyager. So the first one I did was the autobiography of Captain Janeway, the history of the captain that went further than any had before, edited, meaning written, by Hugh McCormack. Now, I listened to the audiobook of this one, and kind of went back and forth and, read some of it. The audiobook was read by Kate Mulgrew, the actress who played Catherine Janeway. And I think that definitely helped increase my enjoyment of the story overall. The first part of the book is like her childhood and Starfleet, and Michael K. Vaughan had made a video about this book as well. He found that stuff incredibly boring, or at least the childhood stuff. I didn't find it quite that boring. I thought that sort of seeing that quotidian life in Starfleet, I thought was just interesting to me, at least. And the impending war that was possibly going to happen with the Cardassians is also very interesting. Once we get into the Voyager years, it just becomes like a summarization of some episodes, and I didn't find that stuff nearly as engaging. So if you were interested in this, I actually recommend the audiobook more than just reading the physical book. I think you will find more enjoyment from it. And then lastly, for Book Trek, I also read Invasion, the Final Fury, the 4th book in the Fury series, 4th and final book. The crew of the Voyager is confronting the Furies, this alien, not race, but civilization, made up of a bunch of species that wants to invade the Alpha Quadrant and retake it because it once owned it. I've had my issues with this series. I really liked the DS9 installment, and I enjoyed the first installment. I wasn't crazy about the TNG one, and this one I had issues with, certainly. I think that the author did a pretty good job as far as tech and space battles and those sorts of things, but I had a difficult time with the morality of this. It felt very un-Star Trek. They basically commit to killing 27 billion people on a planet over a fairly warmongering fear that the rest of the book and what we're shown doesn't really match up with that fear. So I think this could have been an interesting exploration of the decisions that we make out of fear rather than rationalism. But that's not where this went. That could have been a good handle, but that's not where it went. I was kind of disappointed with this. But a pretty busy month. I got quite a bit of reading done. So I can hold this up here. I got Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, Last Words by George Carlin, Where Men Win Glory, The Odyssey of Pat Tillman by John Krakauer, The Elegant Universe by Brian Greene. We got the autobiography of Captain Catherine Janeway, and The Final Fury, Star Trek Voyager Fury series. Yeah, if you've read any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Okay, thank you, BookTube.